We've been telling you tonight, Hurricane Gustav is on its way to New Orleans, and residents have cleared out. 30,000 people took advantage of a free program that bussed families out together. And in keeping with the 2006 Federal Pet Act, no pet was left behind. Gustav has not yet made landfall, but it has already hit the Republican National Convention. Republicans are revising convention plans, and the presidential candidate is promising that the party will react as Americans, not as Republicans. Craig Boswell continues our team coverage live from Minnesota. Hey there, Craig.
Hey, Megan. Yeah, things are changing here. They're setting up for a typical convention, but this will not resemble one. There will be no political speeches tomorrow, minimal business, just enough to set up the nomination of John McCain later this week.
John McCain and vice presidential running mate Sarah Palin toured Mississippi's Hurricane Center and were briefed on preps for Hurricane Gustav. McCain says the tone and substance of the convention in St. Paul will change.
There's very little doubt that we have to go from a party event to a call for to the nation for action. Action to help our fellow citizens in this time of tragedy and disaster.
Resources at Xcel Energy Center will now be used to help provide support to Gulf Coast areas.
I pledge that as tomorrow night, and if necessary, throughout our convention, we will act as Americans, not as Republicans.
New phone lines have been added to the convention floor so outreach calls can be made.
This will be a very different convention than what we thought about, but in these challenging times, the world is a different place today as it is. You know, terrorist threat, acts of God, you need leadership that's callous on its hands. John McCain has that kind of leadership, and will respond in the right way.
While changes to the convention schedule continue, Republicans are still talking about McCain's VP pick, Sarah Palin, the reform-minded governor of Alaska.
We hear about Renaissance men. This is a Renaissance woman. And she has stood up to corruption. She stood up to the good old boy network.
The remainder of the convention schedule here is yet to be determined until the full effects of Hurricane Gustav are known. This will gavel into session about 3 o'clock Eastern time tomorrow and then quickly wrap up after they complete basic business. Live in St. Paul, Minnesota, Craig Boswell, Fox News. Megan, back to you.
All right, Craig, thank you. Stay tuned to My 9 News for continuing coverage of the Republican National Convention. Our Harry Martin will be anchoring from St. Paul beginning tomorrow night. And given what's going on in the Gulf Coast, it's anyone's guess as to how the convention is really going to be playing out. Now, let's bring Shay Ryan back in now for more on Hurricane Gustav. Shay, explain to us a little bit about the eye. Which area on the eye, around the eye, is the most dangerous and why?
Well, as we take a look here on Viper, what you can see is it is Gustav, and this is a current view, and it is the right front quadrant. So if you section off the storm like this, it is this section right here that is the strongest portion of the storm. Now, as we put this into motion, you can see how this storm is moving to the northwest. So if you continue along this trajectory, you are putting the city of New Orleans right there in that right front quadrant. The reason this is so crucial is because that's where the strongest winds are, and that's where you get the strongest storm surge. So that's where you're going to get those waves piling up and pressuring against those levees, which we know are still somewhat susceptible and not completely built in some cases. So that's where we may see more intense likelihood for flooding.
Right, that the water will just go right over the levees. Talk to us also just a little bit about how you're actually predicting this storm. I think the diagrams and the maps are just so amazing that we're seeing where it's going to hit. How do you do that?
Right, you actually see a cone of what we say the cone of uncertainty. And the reason that there's uncertainty is because, again, as we look back at Viper, we call this spaghetti models, and this looks like spaghetti. As you look here on Viper, you can see how all of these different computer models are set up by different variables. So you're taking a lot of different things into account, wind speeds in the upper levels, you're taking a look at sea surface temperatures, etc., and that brings these models into many different directions. As a result, you end up with that cone of uncertainty that goes something like this. As you go out further in time, you get more of a spread on these. Again, though, as you look at the center here, it brings it just to the west of New Orleans. Again, keeping that boot here, or the tip of the boot, in the section of the strongest part of the storm. Now, we certainly have been focusing quite a bit on Gustav, but we are also going to get to our local forecast here. And, of course, we have a decent look at the beaches as well as we finish off this holiday weekend. That's coming up.
Still ahead, we're seeing the first video of what Gustav left behind when it roared through Cuba, close to a Category 5. Why some say these images are deceiving.
I'm Scott Stanford. He tossed a perfect game at Yankee Stadium, but was that the highlight of David Wells' career? We'll hear from Boomer on the Sports Wrap-Up at 10:45.